Okay, well, I can begin talking about, about basically the theology of heaven, if you wish, or the basic teaching of the church on that. Remember that, the Christian Catholic faith, functions at two levels. First, there is what the church teaches officially, quote unquote, the doctrine, and then there is theology, which is a science, and it's a speculative science. I don't believe you'll find 5 theologians in full agreement as to what heaven is like, what heaven should be conceived as. That is what the church has always said. That is left for theologians to discuss. Those are the questiones disputate, in Latin, disputed questions. That is, it's legitimate to speculate on that. The church simply says there is a heaven, which is the contemplation of God, and how do you conceive that? How do you formulate that? How do you, interpret that? It's a matter for theologians to discuss. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's
and
here's the water. Thank you much. Thank you. How do you like UF?
It's pretty great. I transferred over.
Are you a freshman now, or a?
No, I'm a junior.
Oh, you're a junior already.
Yeah.
And you have a double major, economics and philosophy.
Yeah. I transferred over from FSU though. This is my first semester at US.
So you experience a process, an evolution from a Seminole to a Gator. It's quite a regressing evolution. It's.
I don't know if it's regressive, but it's been great. I like it a lot.
Okay, good. It's Teresa was there. When was that at UF?
2002 through 2006.
Right. Really?
More than 18, 12 years that you graduated.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so again, let me say this concerning question number 1. In light of what Alex explained to me, in light of the meaning that Alex clarified further for me, it's why not make just the solar system or just make the Earth and so on. First of all, let me say this: we really don't know, and more astronomers, and I myself, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an astronomer. I only know pretty much what I read in the papers and what I remember from my high school and early college, science courses, quote unquote. But more and more there is a very strong certainty, and in that sense I believe I can say that I'm certain that just by the laws of probability, there must be life in other solar systems and so on. As of 2 weeks ago, the last time I checked, over 3,300 planets have been discovered in other solar systems. There are 150 to 200 billion stars forming the Milky Way. That's only our galaxy. And so the probabilities are that there are billions of planets revolving around their stars. And surely a percentage of those must be similar to Earth and could easily harbor life and maybe even intelligent life. So, there is a very high probability, in my opinion, as a non-scientist, if you will, but just using my common sense, that we are not the only intelligent species in the universe and so on. How do they conceive God? How do they perceive God? How do they, relate to God and so on and so forth? We don't know. We will know when we discover them, if and when we discover them. The same thing happened when the Europeans came into the New World and so on, and they discovered the Native Americans, people living in different countries. One of the first questions they raised, and the theologians at the University of Salamanca and Paris and others, was are these human beings? Do they have an immortal soul and so on? And, when that was decided, yes, we have to evangelize them, we have to treat them with respect and so, even if that didn't happen as such, and so on. But, before they actually met the cultures and civilizations of the New World, they could not, responsibly speculate and ponder, what their religion would be like and so on and so forth. So that is the same thing. The second part of my answer is, why not? God's infinite power is best revealed and best manifested in the infinity of, the closest galaxy to the Milky Way is the Andromeda galaxy, which is 1.8 million light years away from us. 1 light year is, you can ask my brother-in-law if you don't believe me, if you want to check the numbers. 1 light year is like 5.8 trillion miles. I mean, in the Anglo system and so on. So a galaxy that is 2 million light years away, multiply that by 5.8 trillion, it gives you an idea, how far our nearest galaxy is and so on. So the infinity of the universe, when I see these stars at night, the night sky pretty much, defined and decorated, so to speak, by so many stars and so on. I am driven to, I am moved to praise God. So rather than being a problem for me, to me it's a manifestation of the existence of the reality of God's love and God's power. Because in Christian teaching, God doesn't love me because He created me. God created me because He loved me from all eternity and so on. Even before I was conceived in the womb of my mother and so on, God loved me, and there was a sense in which God has everything present to Himself. So why not? Why not? The astronomers today believe that there are about 200 billion galaxies, each one with billions of stars. In them. So that greatness of the universe, even if we were the only planet with intelligent life, that is to say, life capable of transcendence, of going beyond, people capable of going beyond themselves and, and contemplating the mystery that undergirds our own lives and so on. But still, it would make sense for me to have such an incredibly large and vast universe. So that would be my answer to that. Now, questions 2, 3, and 10. The question of evil, that is probably the most crucial of all your questions here. So would you allow me to do the following, to answer or to go at the other questions and then leave the question of God and the problem of evil for the end, because that would be probably the most complex of all the questions. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
I can do it either way.
That's fine.
I can do it either way.
Yeah. But no, it's fine.
Oh.
Yeah, we thought.
Well, Alex was kind enough to send me the. Oh, okay. Well, can we start with question 4?
Well, before we wanted to get an introduction from you, if you don't mind. So
That's right. I haven't introduced myself. I'm sorry. I apologize. I somehow had the notion that Tylene had shared some information with you. Well, I'm Sixto Garcia. I have a PhD in systematic and philosophical theology with a second PhD concentration on New Testament and Biblical Greek from the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. The Fighting Irish. Elena and I have been married 36 years, and I taught at the St. Vincent de Paul Regional Seminary for 30 years exactly. I retired at the end of the 2014 fall semester, and since I have been really busier than I was teaching full time. When I met with the president and rector of the seminary to discuss my retirement, he told me, well, if I know you'll be busier in retirement than you have been teaching full time, and that prophecy has proven to be true enough. I'm involved in a number of commitments, working with sharing and giving lectures and reflections to migrant groups involving Elena and I are involved in our parish at Notre Dame. I'm working on a manuscript for a book on the Christology of the mystical tradition. I'm also coordinating other. I have been engaged in many lectures and cycles of lectures since I retired. Here in Miami at Manresa, the Jesuits Spirituality Center, and elsewhere, I have been involved in the Diocesan School of Christian Formation in Palm Beach, giving 1-year courses to lay people at two different levels, and so I've kept quite busy since I retired, and I am at the ripe young age of 76 right now, which means my father passed at age 93, my mother at age 90, so I'm looking forward to another 17 or 18 years of life, and so on. And but that means I've already lived about 84% of my life, which is a sobering thought. I mean, and 76, I'm probably older than all three of you put together.
That might be the case.
So another sobering thought. I hadn't thought of that, but and I apologize. I somehow I thought that your mother had introduced, had shared with you, so I've had. I mean, I have been involved in dialogues before. See, let me just say this before we dive directly into the questions. See, this is a matter of. I'm very happy to be with you. It's great. Believe me, it is a breath of fresh air to be with people like you who like to inquire and to have developed the ability of critical thinking. I mean, that is a rather rare phenomenon nowadays. I mean, so to me, it is really a joy to be here. I'm happy to be to be here to converse with you. And but one thing that I tell people when I engage in similar dialogues and so on, I mean, it's like when you vote, if you want to you want to vote responsibly, you want to be as well informed as you can about the candidates, right? And then you decide which policies, which program, I mean, of political development or political engagement, I mean, the candidates have, which ones you like, which one you like less, and then you make an informed decision. See, concerning Christianity, especially Catholic Christianity, it's the same thing. There is a lot that is, I mean, that is today diffused, a lot that is broadcast and published today that passes for Christian teaching or Christian belief. I mean, it's really just counterfeit doctrine and so on. So I think that really, I mean, to make an option for or against Christianity, you need to be first informed as to what Christianity, and particularly in my case, the Christian Catholic Church really teaches. And then you decide whether you like that, whether that, that is adequate for your, that speaks to your life, that it gives you a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, and so on, or not. And then you make an informed decision, see, to follow it, to embrace it, or not. But first you need to know what the Catholic Christian Church really teaches, not what maybe some programs on TV, the History Channel. I watch it frequently enough to know that much of what is dispensed there as Christian teaching is not. Not to mention the history of Christian thought, which has been much adulterated. Prostituted would be a more fitting word than and really, and people feed on that, and that is, that is really tragic. But at any rate, would you like to read the questions?
Yeah.
Question number 4 or whatever you want to start.
Yeah. Well, since you were going about talking about how we need to learn the Christian Catholic faith first before we debate.
No. What I'm saying is, we all. I mean, I've been doing this for God knows how long.
Right.
For the better part of my life, I'm still learning. And asking questions. So but for instance, the questions on Adam and Eve, they seem to reflect like a literalistic reading of the book of Genesis, chapters 2 and 3. I mean, and see, the Bible is not just one homogeneous collection of books written with the same literary style, written with the same theological or cosmological approach. You have all kinds of styles there. You have poetry, you have history, you have myth. I mean, you have wisdom literature. I mean, and within those categories, there are different approaches and different ways of conceiving God or speaking about God or speaking to God and so on. The stories of Adam and Eve, see, they were probably written, they belong to an older stage than the story of the creation in 7 days, which is chapter 1. creation in 7 days and so on. Why 7 days? Well, that was the rhythm of life that the Israelite people had. You know, you worked 6 days and you rested on the 7 days. It was written with a liturgical approach. See, a liturgical approach. Obviously, these were not 7 days of 24 hours, and the church has long since, recognized that and so on. I mean, the Adam and Eve are more like types. See, that is a mythopoietic story. That is to say, it takes mythical symbols, see, and then it sorts of weaves them together in order to communicate the reality. The reality is that God is the creator. How God creates, see, that is a matter for science to decide. See, the church is open to the theories of evolution, and within evolution, I work at the School of Medicine for a while, so I know a bit about biochemistry and a bit about ideas about evolution and so on. There are at least 5 or 6 theories of evolution today, and that's for scientists to decide or to fight among themselves. Which one is seems to be the more satisfactory and so on and so forth. The church is open to the notion of the Big Bang, to the theory of relativity, that we came from primeval, hominids, that were primates, and so what? So we did. If that is the case, so we did. There's nothing that violates or contradicts the church's teaching there. But you might see programs on TV that will tell you the church forbids the teaching of evolution. That is false. That is totally false. Certainly today, that is not the case. Pope John Paul II said that evolution is more than a hypothesis. That goes back to Pope Pius XII. So over 70 years ago, Pope Francis has said the same thing. Do you follow what I'm saying? You might see on TV programs that will tell you that the church stands against science, against scientific progress. The times of the Inquisition, monks with hooded, tunics and so on, getting ready to burn someone alive for, Galileo or one of these people. The trial of Galileo. Galileo, yes, Galileo, it's true, was wrongly, condemned by the church in 1636. But basically, long before him, Pope Clement VII in the 16th century, a century before Galileo, had accepted the Copernican theory that says that the Earth goes around the sun, not the other way around. So that was common in the church at the time. The problem with Galileo was partially political, partially, a way of confusion. Galileo was never burned at the stake, as some people say. He was sentenced to be under the domestic arrest for a while, with the Archbishop of Siena, and then he was let go. He was never tortured or physically abused and so on. But it was a mistake. And Pope John Paul II admitted that. Pope Francis has admitted that. That was a mistake on the part of the church to condemn Galileo for arguing what Copernicus a century before had already said. But the church today especially, doesn't oppose scientific progress, and so on. The two come together. These are two different levels of knowledge. Science has its proper and very legitimate autonomy of, research and research and work and so on, and teaching. The church at the level of teaching and at the level of theology, the same thing. You follow what I'm saying? So there is no opposition on the part of the church to the theories of evolution or relativity or any such thing. It's that belongs to scientists to discuss, and to determine and to decide, and so on. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. So, what about allegations that the Bible, for example, is sexist and not accepting of homosexuality?
Okay, that's a very valid question. It's, as I said, you have to interpret the Bible according to the literary style, to the theological understanding of the time when it was written. The books of the Bible were written in a period between the writing part of it. They reflect our traditions, oral traditions going much further back in time, between the 8th century before Christ and the early 2nd century after Christ. You're talking about a millennium, a little less than a millennium. In that period of time, you have, the Bible reflects to a good extent, many of the books anyway, the social attitudes of the time. That is sexism, of course. Patriarchal mentality, of course it exists. You even take St. Paul, who was the first great theologian of the church. It reflects some of that, especially the first letter to the Corinthians, and in other texts, that women should, I mean, know their place in church and so on and so forth, and not talk too much and things like that. And there is a patriarchal concept, I mean, and ideas and attitudes, I mean, that reflect their times. But those are the historically conditioned parts of the Bible. I mean, and so on. The same thing goes with homosexuality and so on. I mean, again, going to St. Paul, he has at least 4 lists of vices or sins. I mean, in 4 different in 4 of his letters, and so on. Homosexuality appears as one of them. But then Paul is referring to a practice that was not uncommon in the world in which he lived. I mean, if Paul lived between the year, say, 4 to 7 before Christ to the year probably 60, 65 after Christ and so on. I mean, you're talking about a time where homosexuality was widely practiced in the Greek world, and to some extent in the Roman world as well. And the Greco-Roman world was the dominant cultural milieu in which St. Paul lived, and so on. So, yes, the Bible reflects that, but see, those are the historically conditioned, non-normative parts of the Bible. I mean, non-normative parts of the Bible. I mean, as far as, homosexuality, well, the practice of homosexuality is one thing. Homosexual tendencies are another thing, and but today the church actually preaches an openness towards openness and kindness and a compassionate and a respectful attitude towards people with homosexual tendencies and even homosexual practices and so on. So things have changed since the time in which the books of the Bible, and especially even the New Testament, say St. Paul, since the time those books were written.
But since you're saying there's historical non-normative parts of the Bible, right?
Sexism, for instance, patriarchal notion of the family, and so on. The male is the dominant, and the woman has to be obedient and submissive, and at all times. That has changed today. I mean, and the church doesn't teach that. In a sense, the church has never taught that the way you hear it said, or the way you read about it sometimes in text. But the Bible reflects a sexist mentality at the time. Sure, it does. But that is historically conditioned. It is not normative.
But how are we to decipher which parts are historical and
that's a very good question.
Historically conditioned.
That's where
parts
you
aren't?
see. That's where reading. Learning about biblical interpretation. What is called exegesis, biblical exegesis, comes into play. Basically, in a sense, one can use common sense too. You see that today in society, the whole idea of a family formed by a dominant male that keeps everyone else, the wife, say, the spouse, the female spouse, in submission and totally subjugated and so on, that doesn't function, at least not in our Western cultures and so on. So, so it's legitimate to assume that that is a non-normative part of the scriptures and so on. Take the question of slavery. The closest that the New Testament comes to expressing an anti-slavery mentality, an attitude against slavery, is Paul's letter to Philemon, where he advises, he's writing to someone, to a friend whose slave escaped and so on. So Paul says, I'm returning him to you as a brother, not as a slave. See, treat him as such and so on. In other words, Paul is not saying let's abolish slavery. Slaves form about 20%, not that much, but about 5% of the population of the Greco-Roman world at the time of Paul. So Paul is saying, I'm returning him to you as a brother, treat him as such, and so on. In other words, Paul is not asking or demanding a change in social structures or political structures that he knows he cannot change at the time. Today is different. Today we are told, the church says that we should, especially Pope Francis, Pope John Paul II, and others have said we should not only, share our wealth with the poor and so on and so forth. We should inquire as to the structural causes of poverty to eliminate them. See, we should look at those structures, financial, economic, political, and so on, that perpetuate poverty. So as to eliminate them, to change them, so we can more effectively fight against poverty. See, almsgiving is not enough. In other words, It's necessary, but it's not enough. We should, I mean, those who engage in politics particularly they should ask and inquire and denounce these structures that may be seemingly good and legal, but actually perpetuate poverty. I mean, the institution of poverty. So how do you tell one from the other? I mean, basically it's formation in biblical sciences, I mean, and so on. And to some extent, a certain sense of anthropology and of sociology. I mean, sociology has become a part of biblical interpretation today. I mean, we look at the way society functioned at the time certain biblical texts were written and how it functions today. See, we can decide what is normative and what is not.
Right, and it just seems like the issue with that is, well, a lot of people, especially young people nowadays, won't do that research. They'll kind of just take that historical condition part of the Bible and take it as a literal, something that the Bible's preaching to do today. And
see, that is what is called fundamentalism, which is a form of biblical interpretation, the kind of biblical interpretation practiced by many, not all, evangelical churches. I mean, and even by many Catholics today. The Bible says so. It's here in the Bible, but you need to interpret the Bible. See, we cannot escape interpretation. Even the refusal to interpret the text is a form of interpretation. It is. This is what is called hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the science that studies how we interpret the text. What are the criteria we use to interpret the text? Exegesis is the actual interpretation of a text. We can exegete anything. A presidential speech. See, the State of the Union speech. Well, my exegesis of that speech tells me this or that. Or we can practice hermeneutics, where I apply certain criteria to interpret the text and so on. But what you say is very true. I mean, there are fundamentalists who will tell you by conviction that the Bible says so. But if you look at the text of Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, I think, if your right eye scandalizes you, pluck it out and throw it away. If your right hand scandalizes you, it's a cause for sin, cut it off. We will all be walking around blind and maimed if we were to follow that. I mean, if we were to follow that to the letter and so on. Do you follow what I'm saying? Now, those are metaphors. That is what is called the hyperbolic or hortatory discourse, a type of deliberate exaggeration, using certain metaphors, if you will, to deliberately make a point. It's when I say, oh my God, I have 1,000 problems in my head. Well, I don't have 1,000 exactly, numerically speaking. What I'm trying to say, I have many problems in my head. Do you follow me? We use that language all the time.
Right.
We use that language all the time.
And you were talking about, before when you were answering one of the questions, of how the church wants to now strive for the destruction of poverty, and that we should go towards a political system or economic system that would help us do that. So does Christianity imply any specific?
That's an excellent question. Okay, surprisingly, my answer is no. If the Christianity does not affiliate a Christian faith, or at least a Christian Catholic Church, does not and cannot say, well, you have to vote for this candidate. You have to vote for so and so. You have to vote for. You have to be a Republican. Many Catholics today believe that to be a good Catholic, you have to be a Republican. And many will tell you, no, you have to be a Democrat, and so on. But no, the church cannot endorse its given political party. However, there is such a thing as political morality. And there is a branch of theology that is called political theology, which is a fascinating thing to study. Exactly. But there is a body of teaching in the church that is normative, which is called Catholic social teaching or Catholic social doctrine. It is the best kept secret in the church. Most Catholics today do not ignore it. I mean, they just haven't read it. They just don't know much about it, if anything. In part because it is, can be very radical and very subversive teaching. For instance, the teaching on private property. Many Catholics believe that the church endorses private property. As a blank check. No, you go back to the 4th century of the Christian age. You have a bishop like Saint Ambrose of Milan, Ambrose, who was the bishop of the city of Milan in Italy today. He died in the year 397, just to give you a time frame, just to give you a sense of proportion. In one of his writings, he says, when you give to the poor, what they need, you are not doing them a favor. You are giving back to them what belongs to them for what God created for the use of all, a few have appropriated. What he's saying is, I mean, what we have in excess, what we have in excess actually doesn't, it's not just a matter of alms giving, see, it is a matter of the morality of it. It belongs to those who are starving to death. According to research done by Catholic Relief Services, which is the American Bishop's branch of Office for Help to Foreign Countries, and Elena is the local coordinator in the Diocese of Palm Beach. 34,000 children will die of starvation today, every day, or starvation-related diseases every day. 870 million people go to bed hungry every day. Here in the United States, see, over 42 million people go to bed hungry every day. Every day. I mean, there is poverty and hunger here. You don't have to go to the jungles of the Mato Grosso or Indonesia or to Haiti, I mean, to witness that. I mean, so what that implies that there are structures that perpetuate poverty. Now, Catholic social doctrine is a body of doctrine. It's very much a normative part of the teaching function of the church, of the teaching office. It is that body of doctrine collected, see, in anthologies or in books here and there, see, containing the teachings, the letters, the encyclical, those are letters, worldwide letters, or the exhortations written usually by popes, sometimes by episcopal conferences. Teaching what the church, basically explaining and diffusing the teaching of the church in social, economic, and political matters. Objection to that. The church shouldn't meddle in politics. The church exists to save souls. No. See, first of all, the church doesn't, first of all, you don't save the soul, you save the whole person. Well, I'll get to that later. You save the whole person and so on. But, since the early Middle Ages, and even before that, theologians and doctors of the church said that every single human act, every single properly human act has a moral sign attached to it. What is a properly human act? One in which your will, your mind, and your affectivity are involved. See, making political choices, getting married or not getting married, studying such and such a career and so on and so forth. These are things, these are decisions and options that involve your whole person and so on. The actus humanus, as they call it in Latin, as opposed to the casual human acts, scratching my head, yawning, and so on and so forth. I hope that what I'm saying does not cause you to yawn. 25 years ago, 21 years ago, whatever, who says, what I quoted, when you give to the poor, see what they need, you're not doing them a favor, you're returning to them what belongs to them, because what God created for the use of all, a few have appropriated, and so on. Or the quote by John Chrysostom, who died 10 years after Ambrose of Milan in 407, not to share with the poor what they need is an act of stealing from the poor, and so on. That has been a constant teaching of the church. It begins actually with the issue of private property. Thomas Aquinas, writing around the year 1273, says that the only thing that legitimizes private property is its service to the common good. He says, because privately owned things are better made ready, are better, prepared to serve the common good than things owned collectively, and so on. But it is, in other words, every piece of private property that I own, has a social obligation, if you will. John Paul II expressed that as having a social mortgage. See, he used that word at least twice in his writing. See, it has a social mortgage, and then he says, private property is a legitimate means. So, but there are other aspects to Catholic social doctrine. First of all, human dignity, respect to the dignity of the human person. Second, the common good. The common good is the good of the entire polis. The word political, as you know, comes from polis, which in Greek means the community, the city, the community, and so on. The common good is the good of each and every person in the community. See, the good of all and of each and every person. It has that balance between the collectivity and the individual person. See, here I may add this. I mean, if you see when when you read the continental philosophers, the continental tradition, especially the phenomenologists and the personalists, people like Martin Buber, Emmanuel Levinas, and Gabriel Marcel and others, you see that person, the concept of person, is not the same as individual. A person implies community. I am a person, see, the moment that I can say you, the moment that my I opens itself to the thou, see, and comes back to me forming a we. See, so the concept of person actually is not the same as the individual. It is a we. You and I are talking right now. See, in the act of, I know myself. I find myself in the act of opening myself to you. And then you come back to me, forming a we. So in every act of knowledge, therefore, and of conversation and of dialogue, there is a community being formed, for good or evil, if you will, but there is a community being formed. So the common good is the good of all the persons, see, and of each and every person, see, forming a polis, a political or social system, and so on. The objection, see, again, is that why is the church discussing this? Because every human act, every act that really involves, summons all the faculties of the human person, your mind, that is to say, your intellect, your will, and your affectivity, has a moral sign attached to that. See, a moral sign that may be rather indifferent or may be very good, and so on and so forth, but it does have a moral act attached to that. And everything that evinces a moral sign and so on, the church has not only the right, but the duty, to speak on it and so on. Again, keeping in mind that politics is not the same as politicking. See, the church will never tell you, you have to vote for such and such a candidate. She cannot do that. Well, what if a candidate is a communist? The most the church can tell you is to remind you that the communist philosophy and system, at least in its basic forms, is incompatible with Christian faith, and that's all. But it cannot tell you you cannot vote for the communist candidate. So even though it has happened at times, but when it happens, it's wrong. So that is the difference, that is the distinction. So that means that, among other things, the common good, the sense of subsidiarity, that is a principle actually conceived or defined by Pope Pius XI in 1931. Subsidiarity means it applies very much to a democratic system. What can be done at the intermediate levels in a system should not be done just from the top. The top cannot just decide everything. There has to be a power of delegation. And that speaks to democratic participation and so on. And he's talking about in the sense of the church and so on, in the sense of social systems and so on. But the church can and should speak on what are the criteria for a just salary. First of all, the good and the needs of the worker. Second, the good and the needs of the place he's working for. Third, the good and the needs of the nation he lives in. And there was a fourth one added by Pope John the 23rd, the good and the needs of the universe as a whole, of the entire planet. Those are criteria. Now, how that applies in concrete circumstances, that, of course, you have to take each case as it comes and so on. So basically, that is pretty much sort of a very brief, very insufficient summary of Catholic social doctrine. And so on. But it's part of the normative teaching of the church. The tragedy is that most Catholics in most parishes don't have a clue about it. And whenever someone like me, I could bore you to death for the next 7 hours telling you how many times I've been accused of being a communist, a socialist, or some kind of leftist, subversive, pinko, or a dangerous person, just simply for saying what I've just told you. For saying that, but as I say to people, sometimes I read to people that text from Ambrose of Milan that I quoted to you. He said that in the year 390. 390. I read this to people, and then say when I'm giving a conference in a parish or someplace, and I ask them, I don't tell them the source, and I ask them, who said this? Can you identify the author of Karl Marx or Lenin or Fidel Castro? Say, no, this was written by a father of the church who died in the year 397. And so, you mean communism goes back that far? I say, yes. Communism and socialism and all those subversive systems go back that far. No, communism is a word invented, pretty much in modern times and so on. So long before Karl Marx even was born, there were people already speaking this, basically defining how the church in its Catholic tradition conceived the obligations, the moral imperative towards society and politics and economics and so on and so forth. Does economics have a moral system? Yes, I had a seminarian who is a parish priest today, has a PhD in economics from the University of Miami, and he once told his dissertation director about the question of the ethics of economics, and his director looked at him as if he were looking at someone just arrived from the outer moons of Jupiter. What do you mean ethics? Economics. Economics has to be guided by the criteria, whatever works, whatever is more productive, whatever is. What do you mean ethics? If you're concerned about ethics, drop out of this field and so on. You follow what I'm saying? The ethical consciousness, the ethical imperative of any professional field such as economics is there. It's very clear. But now the sins of the world, is that the other question?
Actually, since you were talking about common good,
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of a lot of people are claiming that organized religion, due to wars and all the other crimes towards humanity, they seem to cause a lot of harm, and I don't know. It's hard to see that they do more good than harm.
That is a legitimate question. It's a very good question, and so on. This is an issue that has a problem that has a tragedy, if you will, that has been happening through the centuries. Since time immemorial, people and the groups and communities and nations have waged war in the name of God and inflicted unspeakable harm and destruction on others, and so on. My answer or my reflection would be this. Number one. When you look at the history, the real history of this so-called war of religions, say the war of religions that happened in France, there were 8 wars of religion in France between 1562 and 1598, and so on. Between Catholic and Calvinist Huguenots, as they were called, and so on. When you study what really went on there, the real dynamics of it, you see there was as much politics as religion. Religion often was invoked as a pretext or as an excuse to wage territorial wars or dynastic power, struggles within the French crown and so on. The same thing happened during the wars of religion during the early years of the Protestant Reformation and so on. Many of the German princes, separated from the church because Martin Luther and others offered them a chance to gain autonomy and to stop paying the stipends that they owed Rome, the Pope in Rome, just by dint of being Catholic princes and so on. And I'm not saying that all Protestants simply, split from the church, separated on just economic or financial grounds. But there was, on the Catholic side, there was also a question of territory we're going to lose if these princes become Lutheran and so on and so forth. So political and economic issues intervene, as crucial actors, in these wars of religion and so on. But going specifically to the issue here, that may be one reason, one issue that perhaps keeps many people from embracing or following a particular, Christianity or any particular form of religion and so on. The answer is that there is a misuse and a misinterpretation of religion because, I have read the Quran. I have a nice copy of the Quran at home, probably the critical edition if you want to conceive such, and so on. And I read all 122 surahs or chapters, and yes, there are attempts, there are texts there about holy wars and so on. But the word jihad, in Arabic means effort, struggle. It can be applied to a holy war where you kill people, or it can be applied to the striving to make the Islamic presence, in any particular region and so on. And you can make an argument that Islam in itself does not preach, the violence and the destruction that groups like ISIS and others have engaged in and so on. Christianity certainly, Jewish Christian tradition doesn't preach, doesn't diffuse, doesn't proclaim or invite to practice the kind of violence that in the name of, See, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or in the name of Jesus Christ, has been practiced, still is practiced to some extent through the centuries and so on. It is a misuse, a misinterpretation of what Christianity really means about. Perhaps the most glaring example are the Crusades, who were preached for the first time in the year 1096, and they lasted through the year 1292, and so on. I mean, it was not a happy time in the age of the church, but Christianity as such, what is truly Christian faith, in other words, that which is contained in the gospel of Jesus Christ, as the church has retrieved it, deepened it, explained it, and applied to concrete circumstances, has been perverted many times, has been contaminated. Allow me to use that word again, prostituted. I mean, very often and so on. But if I may offer a rather feeble, I admit it, rather feeble analogy, there are physicians that are incompetent, there are quacks, that are dishonest, they're abusive. You don't disqualify the whole science of medicine because of that. I mean, and so on. It's not a very good comparison, I admit it, but I mean, I would say this, that if I were to ask you, imagine a world without religion today. Imagine a world where, see, people who sincerely, honestly, people driven by compassion, a sense of justice, and mercy, and a very deep sense of the common good, were not around as followers of, say, the Jewish Christian tradition, for instance, see, or even the Islamic tradition. What kind of a world we'll be living in? I would answer readily. I mean, it will be an unlivable world. I mean, it will be just, chaotic. The world will be a chaotic place. I mean, the hospitals, and most of the works done by social agencies today, welfare or whatever, most of the charitable works done, eventually they go back to traditions that sink their roots in Christianity or in Judaism and so on, in the Western world. And the hospitals, I mean, as I mentioned, the programs to benefit the poor, to feed the hungry, and so on. I mean, without those, the humanity would have been a much poorer, much more unbearable place to live in. I mean, so if it is true that wars waged in the name of religion, be it Islam or Judaism or Christianity, have inflicted unspeakable harm to so many people, it is true, however, that those people who have tried to be faithful, see, to the teachings and to the preachings and to the doctrines of their religion, have allowed for what today we will call the civilized world, and to everything good that happens in it. We can easily demonize, religion, but it would be unfair to, I say, those who do work. Hospitals are visited by people, by lay people, and even by religious who anonymously, their names will not appear in the Sun Sentinel or the Miami Herald the next day, and so on. But they do that day after day after day after day. There are people who work with the poor where they live, in their slums, in their poor neighborhoods, who eat what they eat or don't eat what they don't eat, and so on. And there are doctors. Take, for instance, there is this institution, Doctors Without Borders, right? These are physicians who offer their services to people in faraway countries where basic medical needs are not available, free of charge. These people are driven, maybe many of them may not be explicitly religious. It's not a religious institution per se, see, and their member physicians may not be religious, many of them anyway, but they're driven by a culture, see, that was fashioned by the Jewish Christian tradition. I'm talking about the Western tradition anyway. It was fashioned by the Western Christian tradition, which has been altered and, yes, forgotten and perverted many times, but that would be my answer, my reflection on it.
And I want to get into more of the mechanics of heaven. And one question we have is, if Christ, for example, Jesus Christ died for all our sins, why is salvation not predetermined? Why is there still sin? Why is there still hell?
Okay, you are entering into the problem of evil indirectly, but anyway, I think that basically what you said, the way you preface it, is the real core. What are the dynamics of heaven and hell? Heaven and hell are not places, see, or spaces, see, where people live. The people live. These are conditions, to be sure, conditions that have a sort of a communitary reality about them. See, where the basic desire of the human being is fully achieved. As I mentioned to you before, I mean, already from the 5th century onwards, I mean, people like Augustine, in the 13th century, people like Thomas Aquinas and others, still today, even secular philosophers, or people like, say, the secular Jewish tradition, like Emmanuel Levinas and others, Martin Buber, I mean, will agree that, I mean, what makes the human being human, what defines us as human is not cranial capacity, but it is the fact that the human being is best defined as a living craving, desire, and hunger for meaning, for absolute meaning. In the Jewish Christian tradition, we will call that meaning by a personal name, God, and so on. This is what defines me. This is not something that I learned. This is not something that I learned after much reading or inquiry or research or prayer. This is something that I am by dint of. This is common to the atheist, to the non-believer, and to the mystic. It is common to the saint and to the sinner. It is something that defines me as human. It is what makes me ultimately human. Heaven is, see, that mode of being. I guess that is the best wording that I can find. That mode of being with such a desire and craving is fully achieved by being possessed by a God. Do remember that in mainstream Christianity, we conceive of God as Trinitarian, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. 3 persons in one God. Each person is not 33% of God, 1/3 of God. Each person is fully God. The persons, the Trinitarian person, is defined as relations. As relation. The Father begets the Son from all eternity, and through the Son and with the Son, the Holy Spirit, and so on. See, so the importance of that is this, without getting lost into the details, is that God is a family. It's a family of love. God is not a monolithic being way out there, lost in the blinding radiance of the stars and the galaxies, far away from us and not caring from us, and so on. I mean, God is love, as the first letter of John says, because God is love within himself. See, and that love pours out. It's like filling this cup here. See, you keep pouring water, and what happens when you get to the brim? It just flows over, right? It spills over. Well, that is God in a sense. I mean, if I may, offer you an image of God, is think of that cup as being filled with water. You put that under a tap and leave the tap running. I mean, God is a love that is always overflowing, and that overspilling of God's own being as love is what we call creation. See, creation of finite beings happens as an act of the overspilling of the love of God. Heaven is the place, the mode of being. You see, remember that I learned my basic religion when I was 10, and I was 10 66 years ago, so, I was 7 or 8 or 10, see, many more years than I care to remember, so, but heaven is that mode of being where we sense that the best way of describing it, again, no one has been to heaven and come back to tell the story or to give us a DVD or a YouTube or any such thing. I mean, so the best thing we can do is approximate it by our own experience here in life. See, the best way we can talk about heaven is by our own experience in life. Experience here in life. Imagine love. Think of the person you love the most, or the people you love the most, and so on. Think how you feel when you are in their presence. That dialogue that may happen with or without words, and so on. Two lovers basically express their love for each other by saying, "Oh, it is so good to be with you," with or without words. Well, that is what heaven is like. And just as two people who love each other are never bored in each other's company, people say, "Oh, heaven is contemplating God. It's more fun not going to heaven." Or no, I mean, that's a very childish way of approaching it. It's the experience of loving and being loved to the fullest, and you never are bored by that. Because that kind of love, of self-givenness, of self-surrender, is what gives meaning to your life. Hell, on the other part, and by the way, heaven in a sense doesn't happen, well, I die and suddenly, bing, boom, I'm in heaven. Heaven begins down here. You can have an anticipation of heaven whenever you, as the great German Jesuit theologian has said, this is the guy that I regard as my father in the faith. And my father in the faith and spirituality, Karl Rahner, probably the most important theologian of the Second Vatican Council. Heaven begins in a sense, you can anticipate it, you can approximate it whenever you love unconditionally, whenever you love above all riskily, whenever your act of love implies a risk, a subversion of social values or of your own position or standing in society, or your own preconceptions, whenever you dare to love without even thinking, about any reward for that act of love, love just for the sake of, those moments may be rare, but whenever you can engage in such a moment, you have experienced heaven by anticipation. That's what heaven is like. Hell, on the other hand, is not a place either. It's a mode of being where you willfully, deliberately, no one goes to heaven by slipping on a banana peel, boom, I committed a mortal sin, I'm in hell. No, I had I got excited by watching a woman or a man half naked or whatever, that kind of thing, and I mortally sinned. No, that's a childish conception. Hell is that place where, it's that mode of being that I myself sentence myself to. God doesn't send anyone to hell. God doesn't send anyone to hell. God is just simply looking for us all the time. It is I, who have made a fundamental option, that is a key concept, fundamental option, that is an option in life, to live my life according to a criteria or a value or a faith, that drives me, impels me into this direction. And in this case, is the direction of myself, centering everything around myself, making myself the center of the universe, denying and refusing deliberately to engage in acts of compassion, of mercy, of justice, and just to look after myself. To study a career just to make a profit. We all need to work and make a salary. That is obvious. But to choose a career just for the money will give me, to marry someone just for the whatever, whatever benefit that may accrue to me, in other words, to center everything that I do and think and engage in just around myself. What I'm doing there is making a fundamental option for myself as the center of the universe. And if I make that fundamental option a final decision, that's what hell is like. It's basically, some people will say, people who have this more childish conception of hell, well, why should hell be eternal? Why God doesn't give people in hell a second chance? Well, first of all, the church has never said of anyone, the church has never said that there are people suffering hell. Okay, no one, no one, not even the worst maniac or genocidal spirit going around, never, and so on. The church doesn't teach and so is in hell, and so on. That's for people to speculate, and I would rather not do that. But what makes hell hellish, is precisely the fact that it is not a matter that God doesn't give you a second chance. It is a matter that you don't want a second chance. Because you're suffering hell because you made a fundamental option against that ultimate love that is basically the ultimate end of your life, the reason for your life, the reason why you're alive, the reason why you're created. It is you who don't want a second chance. It is you who doom yourself to hatred. Why? Because you realize that you have forsaken, you have severed, that bond, that line of salvation that you have with He who is the ultimate meaning of life for you, and you have deliberately severed that. You make that fundamental option, it becomes radicalized. So it is not that God doesn't want to give you a second chance. It is that you yourself don't want a second chance. You have, in a sense, defined yourself against God. That's why the church says, has never said, well, Judas Iscariot, the guy who's betrayed Jesus, is in hell for sure. No. We don't know of anyone who is suffering hell. That's the second part of the question. Why are people still going to hell? We don't know. We don't know if there are people going to hell. We don't know that. Jokingly, I say to people at times, well, if I go to hell, it may be a little warm, but I'll be in very interesting company there. but that's only, I mean, in a purely humorous vein, because we really don't know. I mean, in that sense, hell like heaven begins here too. Begins here too. You can anticipate hell. See, when you live just for yourself, when you live just for the pursuit of whatever gives you more fame or money or applause or pleasure or whatever, when everything around you is predicated just on your own, your own pursuit of, your own well-being and so on, which is the very contrary. I mean, heaven is precisely and by the way, let me introduce here a concept before we go into evil, the concept of mystery. It goes back, way back in antiquity. Already Plato spoke about mystery in an indirect way in his work, The Republic, and in the Sophist and the Parmenides. But mystery, as Gabriel Marcel, the phenomenologist, has said, he distinguishes. This is a very useful distinction for me. He distinguishes between a problem and a mystery. Mystery is that which transcends, transcends myself. Mystery is that which I can only participate in. It is not a problem to be solved. Most of the things we refer to as a mystery, a detective mystery. Who was the killer? Well, read Agatha Christie's detective mysteries or whomever, or Sherlock Holmes and so on. He's trying to solve the mystery of who killed so and so. What we call mystery there is simply a problem. To discover the killer, to find out the identity of the killer, and so on. Mystery is that which is transcendent, which is, in a sense, gives full meaning, can invite me to find meaning in my life. It is that which I can only participate in. It is not a problem to be solved. It is just a reality to participate in. The problem of evil is a mystery. The problem of salvation is a mystery. The problem of why we are saved by someone whom we call Jesus Christ, whom we believe, Christian tradition believes anyway, mainstream Christian tradition believes to be fully divine, fully God, like the Father who sent him, and fully human, capable of suffering, of feeling anguish, of feeling physical and emotional pain, of coming within millimeters of despair and so on. I mean, that is something that I can only participate in, not give you an exact, and that leads into the issue of evil. And a God that is all good, a God whom Jewish Christian tradition believes to be, professes to be all good and all powerful, omnibenevolent and omnipotent, and so on, and yet there is evil in the world. I mean, I don't have to, to stress the point here. All we have to do is read the papers or simply, go out of the front door. And how can we reconcile the existence of a God that is, we profess to be omnipotent, that is all good and at the same time all powerful rather, and all good, with the fact that 34,000 children, as I mentioned before, will starve to death today all over the world. I mean, every day, or starve to death or die of starvation-related disease. Why is it that less than 2% of the population of the world, of the working force of the world, makes less than, $2 a day, lives on $2 a day, and so on? Why is it that, countless children die in tsunamis, in acts of genocide, in wars, and so on? What have they done? To deserve that, and even people whom we hold to be deserving of such a faith, we shouldn't do that, but sometimes we do. Why is it that they suffer? Why the suffering in the world and so on? That question has a long history. The first one to formulate it, at least the first one that I know of, was the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who died in the year 270 before Christ. The Roman poet Lucretius said the same thing, and the way Epicurus formulated it is pretty much the way it is still being asked today. Either God wishes to prevent evil and suffering, in the world, but cannot, in which case God is an inefficient God. What good is a God? What good is to me a God that wishes to prevent evil and suffering, but does not have the power. That is an efficient God. It's not a God. It's a, what the ancients used to call a demiurge. It's sort of a middle God, or a powerful being, but not God. Or God has the power to prevent evil, but does not wish to. In which case, Epicurus said, God is the devil himself. Or God neither has the power to nor wishes to prevent evil, then God doesn't exist, and we're back to square one. That has been reformulated in many ways. The French philosopher and playwright Albert Camus, Nobel laureate in 1957. You read him?
Yeah. I mean, I remember
The Plague. I mean, the Happy Death, the Rebel. I've read the Myth of Sisyphus. I mean, that's that book of essays pretty much defines his own question. I mean, his own search for answer. I mean, it's Camus say, well, either it's a matter of freedom. Either God is free. I mean, either evil exists because God is not free to prevent it, in which case God doesn't exist, or God is free to prevent it, in which case, I mean, what kind of a God is that? I mean, and so on. So Camus put it in a different fashion, but basically he was restating the question of Epicurus and so on. Okay, why? Why? If I had a because to the why, I would have written a book on it long ago, become rich, wealthy, retired to maybe against my own values, if you will, to some kind of mansion in the Bahamas or something like that, I mean, and so on. See, that is truly a mystery in the sense in which Gabriel Marcel defines that, and other phenomenologists, it's, and so on. It has been an important question for theologians engaged in political theology, like the German tradition particularly, like the Protestant Jürgen Moltmann or the Catholic Johann Baptist Metz and others. And in fact, Pope Francis was asked that question in a recently released film, A Man of His Own Word. And what he says is pretty much what the best that can be said. We don't have an answer. I mean, to be honest, you asked me that question point blank, and my most honest answer would be, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, but I know this. I know that there is much good in the world alongside all that terrible evil that happens. All those children dying of starvation, all those children and other people dying in acts of genocide, in wars and so on, that they are not implicated in, and that people dying of everyday diseases and so on, cancer and whatever. And that there is much good in the world, and that good, I mean, flows from someone. I mean, the partial good comes ultimately from a totally and radically, I mean, infinitely good source and so on, which is the source that we call God. Second, there is you look at the Jewish Christian scriptures, the clamor of the suffering are all over the place. And they don't give you a ready-made answer. They don't but it's a clamor to a God, that is there, and yet, it is an intuition, if you will. I mean, an intuition, if you will, but it is a rational intuition. It is. Let me go back a little. Let me go back to the German Nazi Holocaust, the concentration camps, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Treblinka, and so on. Are you familiar with the Jewish philosopher, author, and activist, a survivor of 3 German concentration camps, Elie Wiesel?
Of course.
You are.
Yeah.
Nobel laureate, 1985. And Medal of Freedom in the United States, 1986, the year after. I read his books, Night, Day, the trilogy, and other works of his as such. And he, or people like he and others like him, he lost his mother and sister at Auschwitz. Then he was transferred to the camp of Buna, and from there to Buchenwald, where he lost his father. So he lost mother, sister, and father. In 3 concentration camps, Nazi concentration camps. He asked, he was not an explicitly religious man, but he has a sense of God, if you will. And he said that he tells us the story of when he was at Boone, I think it was, he was forced, along with his fellow inmates, to watch the hanging of a young man, 14-year-old, who was found to be smuggling weapons into the camp. He was sentenced to hang, and he was very slightly built. I mean, he was famished, and he died slowly by strangulation. It took him 20 minutes, half an hour to die. They were forced to watch that act of horror, and after they went back to the barracks, some of them were saying, where is God in all this? Where is God in all this? And we still coined the phrase, he and others, can we pray to God after Auschwitz? Can we pray to God after the horrors we have witnessed during the Second World War, and so on? Are we?
No, you're good.
And so on. And Wiesel never said explicitly, there is no God, but he threw the gauntlet at believers, especially people in the Jewish Christian tradition. I mean, the God that appears, that comes forth from these scriptures, from both the Jewish and the Christian scriptures and so on, is a God that ultimately can be defined, say Psalm 131, or means 131. I mean, like a weaned child in my mother's arms, like a weaned child, so is my rest in you, God, and so on. And the prophet Isaiah, can a mother forget the child of her womb? Can a mother forget the child in her arms? Can a mother forget the fruit of her womb? Even if a mother should, I will never forget you, says the Lord. Can that kind of God, how can that kind of God be reconciled with a God that allows all these horrors? See, all these terrible moments of suffering, of people inflicting unspeakable pain. We can go to Stalin and the Gulag camps and so on and so forth. And through the centuries, this has happened. But Wiesel said something that other survivors also said. There were Jews in Auschwitz that prayed to God as they walked towards their execution, towards the gas chambers or towards the firing squad. They were praying to God. With all the horrors around them, they still held their faith in God. Why? Because somehow, in an apparent contradiction to the existence of the presence of a God that has all power and that is goodness itself, is love itself, and this is something Jews have done through the centuries. Something that the Gospels of Matthew and Mark put in the place of Jesus, who was a good Jew. Why have you abandoned me? My God, why have you abandoned me? And so on. That was the closest I can come to. Don't ever buy cheap answers which have been tried. Well, God wants to test your faith. What kind of a cruel and inhuman God is that will test your faith, allowing this kind of horror? God respects the freedom of the evildoer. Well, then there is no use in praying to God to be spared from evil. Those are cheap answers that I've heard. In an attempt to save God from non-existence in the face of evil, people have come up with those, to me, very illegitimate answers, which are actually an act of disrespect towards people who have experienced this kind of suffering. That is the closest I can come. There is a John Henry Newman, a 19th century Anglican, later Catholic theologian, said that why is it that the average man or woman in the pews, the non-philosopher, the non-theologians, why is it that they continue to believe? If you ask them, prove to me the existence of that God you believe in, Newman says they will give you, they might give you good reasons but bad arguments. If they were to give you philosophical arguments, they might be all over the place. They might give you rotten philosophical arguments. But the reasons are those that this is what makes sense. I have this intuition, this drive, this sense that my life my life in the hands, my life embraced to a God that will allow suffering, no doubt, and I will go through suffering, and many other people will. Unspeakable suffering, perhaps, unexplainable suffering. My life makes more sense. My life is better. My life is sweeter. It is a more human life. Within the context of affirming my faith in God than otherwise. This is what Newman called the convergence of probabilities. And it can be explained, it can be brought down to earth by saying this. If, my best friend walks through that door, or Elena walks through that door, and tells me, I just saw an accident out there. right there in the street out in front, what would my reaction be? No, I cannot believe you. I have to go out and check for myself. No, my first reaction would be to believe her, see, or to believe my friend, unless they walk in drunk and intoxicated. But I mean, it would be to believe them. Why? What makes him worthy of credibility? Why would I believe her? Why would I believe my best friend? What are the reasons why? I don't have any empirical reason telling me, yes, you have to believe them, but why am I certain that indeed an accident took place? If they tell me, I just saw an accident happening in the street, why would I believe them? Why would I have this certainty that an accident really took place? Why? Why would I believe them?
You trust them.
Right, exactly. And why do I trust them? First of all, there is an intimate relationship, right? There is a relationship of trust, of love, love of friendship, conjugal love, whatever. I mean, second, because that love tells me that they are worthy of credibility, that, they are, what they say, see, deserves credibility. But all that, you don't go through that process, mental process, every time that happens. It happens automatically, right? It happens instinctively, and so on. See, in fact, even if an unknown person were to walk in, and say to us in all seriousness, I just saw an accident out there, my first instinct would be to believe that person. See, unless it were a practical jokester or something like that. Do you follow what I'm saying? That is the convergence of probabilities. That's the way we live. That's the way we live. When we can wake up in the morning, we assume the world's still out there. See, we don't call CNN or checking on your app, to see if the world's still out there. We assume the world is. I'm going to work. You assume that the building where you work at, where your workplace is located, it is still there. See, it hasn't been blown up by a terrorist, that your boss still there, it hasn't been abducted by a UFO or anything like that. You assume certain things without which you couldn't believe. With faith, something similar happens. That's why the man or woman in the pew, who may not offer you good philosophical reasons, and so on, see, good philosophical arguments may give you bad arguments, will still give you good reasons for that. But believe me, to this day, I still struggle with this question. People of faith, people who have, as I hope my faith is, responsible faith. People who want to be responsible for their faith have to question it every day, have to challenge it, have to meet those challenges every day. This is the most classical, the most traditional challenge to Jewish Christian faith today. The question of evil in the world, especially the suffering of the innocent, and so on. And to this day, great theologians still struggle with that. Romano Guardini was an Italian-German theologian who anticipated many of the reforms that have happened in the church today, many of the theological reforms. He was a prolific author. He wrote not only on theology, on Revelation, on Christ, and so on. He wrote on literature, on poetry, on a number of things. And when he died in 1968, and shortly before he died, he said, the first thing I want to ask God is why? Why the suffering of the innocent? Because to this date, nothing, no person, no book, not even the Bible, has explained to me why the detour of suffering into heaven. Why? And that was Romano Guardini, who was a holy man, a man of great faith, a man of who inspired many people by his preaching, a man who inspired many people with his theology and his philosophy and so on. A great theologian and philosopher. Shortly before he died, he said, I still want God to explain this to me. But see, he said God. He didn't say, I cease to believe in God because I haven't found the answer. See, and that is basically the challenge. So, I hope that what I have said today makes sense to you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, thank you very much.
And I hope to see you again. I hope to dialogue with you again. And thank you for inviting me. Thank you for. It has been a breath of fresh air for me.
Yeah, for us too. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Sure. And I want to give you my card. I had them printed after not long ago because I was using my old seminary card. I had to scratch off. So I decided to print some new ones. So I printed enough to last me for the rest of my life. Or so Elena says. I mean, I don't know if she's predicting, I mean, an early demise, so she'll be free to remarry to a normal man, or...
Any questions?